It's lunchtime at Broadhaven Primary School, and the boys are supposed to be playing football. February 4th, 1977. Pembrokeshire, Wales. The sky is the color it is almost always that time of year out there on the western edge of Britain, low and gray and serious. The field behind the school is wet. The air is cold. And three boys, Michael, David, and Sean, are standing at the edge of the schoolyard not playing football anymore because something is in the field. It's silver, long, shaped like nothing any of them have ever seen, sitting low in a natural hollow in the ground just beyond the fence. It has a dome across its middle and a red light pulsing slowly on top. There are windows, 10 or 11 of them. There's a door, and something like a ramp leading down from the door to the grass. And then something moves near it. A figure. Humanoid. Silver. Wrong in a way that a 10-year-old boy does not have the words for yet, which means the only thing left to do is stand very still and stare. Michael Webb watches it for 3 to 5 minutes. He will describe it the same way for the next 50 years. Silver, cigar-shaped, big dome, red light flashing on top. I watched it, he will say. I'm sure it was a spaceship. More children drift over. Word spreads the way it does in a schoolyard. Some of them see the figure. Some of them run. 9-year-old Jeremy Passmore will later remember that his friend Tudor was nearly crying because he was scared he was going to be disintegrated or something. Which is, if we're being honest, a completely reasonable fear under the circumstances. The bell rings. The bell always rings. And they go back inside and tell their teacher, who does not believe them. They are children, after all. Children have imaginations. Children want attention. Children see things. But here's what happened next. And this is the part I want you to hold on to as we go through this story together. The headmaster, Ralph Llewellyn, was a skeptic. He was not interested in fairy tales. He separated those children one by one, put them in different rooms, and asked each one to draw what they saw, alone, without talking, without comparing notes to anyone. He was trying to catch them in a lie. That is exactly what he was doing, because if the story was invented or exaggerated or built from one kid's imagination spreading to the next like a cold through a classroom, then the drawings would all fall apart. Different shapes, different details, the ordinary chaos of 14 young minds working independently. He looked at 14 drawings. They were strikingly similar. That is exactly what he said. Strikingly similar. And then Ralph Llewellyn, the skeptic who went looking for flaws in a fairy tale, went quiet on the subject, and largely stayed that way. I've been thinking about those drawings for months. I'm sitting in California, nearly 5,500 miles from a wet field in Wales, and I cannot get those drawings out of my head. 14 kids, separate rooms, one thing on the paper. And that is where this story starts. This is still unexplained. Brief explorations of unsolved mysteries. My name is Mark. Before I tell you what happened in Broadhaven in 1977, I want to tell you where Broadhaven is. Because for many listeners, Wales is one of those places that exists as a general idea rather than a specific location. And this case deserves a specific location. Wales is a country on the western edge of Great Britain, sharing a border with England to the east and facing the Atlantic to the west. It is about the size of New Jersey, which tells you almost nothing useful about what it actually feels like to be there. What it actually feels like is ancient. The landscape is generally old, in a way that American West, for all its grandeur, simply is not. There are hill forts in Wales that predate the Roman occupation. There are standing stones whose purpose nobody fully understands. The Welsh language, still spoken by roughly 1 million people, is one of the oldest living languages in Europe, and it carries inside it a whole way of understanding the world that does not translate cleanly into English. Pembrokeshire is the southwestern corner of Wales, a long arm of land that reaches out into the Irish Sea. The coastline is extraordinary. Cliffs, hidden coves, beaches that faced west so the Atlantic light hits them full in the face at sunset. It is a national park. It is also historically a place that the rest of Wales has regarded with a certain respectful unease. The Mabinogion, the great collection of medieval Welsh myths drawn from oral traditions far older still, is set largely in the ancient region of Dyfed, which is essentially Pembrokeshire. The anonymous author of those stories described it as a land of mystery and enchantment. The stories themselves involve a porous boundary between the natural world and what the Welsh tradition calls the otherworld, a parallel realm where things that should not exist move freely, and where travelers sometimes cross over without meaning to. The Preseli Hills in northern Pembrokeshire are the source of the bluestones at the heart of Stonehenge, each one weighing around 2 tons, roughly 1.8 metric tons, moved approximately 200 miles, 320 kilometers, to Wiltshire by people using tools we still do not fully understand. The Welsh explanation for many centuries was that Merlin did it. I'm not saying the land is magic. I am saying that the land has a very long memory, and that in 1977 what happened there rhymed with things that had been happening in that corner of the world for a very long time. Now, February 4th, 1977, Broadhaven Primary School. Michael Webb, David Ward, and Sean Garrison are the first to see the craft. Philip Rees arrives moments later and watches it from about 1:30 in the afternoon until nearly 2 o'clock, close enough to see a door open in its side. He says afterward, "I was frightened. 2 friends, Tudor and David, were very frightened." Paul Williams gets close enough to see something emerge from it. He will simply say, "We saw something come out of it. It had a helmet. We ran and told Sir." Sir did not believe them. And so headmaster Ralph Llewellyn did what a rigorous skeptic does. He ran a test. He separated the children, sat each one down alone, and asked them to draw what they saw before they could confer, before memory could be softened by other people's versions, before the story could become a group story rather than 14 individual ones. He expected the drawings to contradict each other. He expected them to fall apart. They did not fall apart. There's one more child worth knowing by name. David Davies was also 10 years old that day, but he was not part of the original group. He was, by his own description to the BBC decades later, a natural-born skeptic. When classes resumed after lunch and the other kids were buzzing about a spaceship in the field, Davies decided he would go and disprove it himself after school. He walked to the fence, got halfway over it, stopped. 45 feet, about 14 meters of iridescent silver hovering low, dome across the middle third, red light pulsing. His sighting lasted only a couple of seconds before the object dropped behind the trees. But it was enough. He told the BBC, "It popped up and then went behind a tree. My sighting only lasted a couple of seconds." David Davies is now the only one of those 14 children, all of them now in their late 50s and 60s, who still speaks openly to the press. He has told the same story for 50 years. The shape of it has not changed. The details have not drifted. He has had every opportunity to walk it back, soften it, find a more comfortable explanation, and he has not taken any of them. That matters. I want to say clearly that I believe David Davies. I believe Michael Webb. I believe Philip Rees and Jeremy Passmore and Paul Williams and the 9 other children who sat alone in separate rooms and drew the same thing. I believe their teacher, Mrs. Morgan, who went on record with words that deserve to be said out loud. I saw it too, you know. I believe them because of the test, because Llewellyn designed a test that was supposed to expose a lie, and the test came back the other way. The school incident opened something in Pembrokeshire that did not close again for the rest of the year. By the time 1977 was over, more than 450 paranormal incidents had been reported across the county to local authorities. That number is worth sitting with for a moment. Pembrokeshire in the 1970s had a population of around 100,000 people. 450 reported incidents from farmers, shopkeepers, hotel owners, families with children, people with no obvious reason to want the attention that came with making this kind of claim in a small community where everyone knows everyone. The British press descended on the area quickly. The Sun called it the Terror Triangle. Researchers started using the Welsh Triangle and the Duvet Triangle, drawing a deliberate comparison to the Bermuda Triangle, which tells you something about how people reach for language when the language they have is not big enough. A local hotel began advertising UFO spotting weekends, which sounds funny until you understand that by that point, the witnesses were not eccentric outliers. They were the neighbors. Now I want to tell you about Rosa Granville, because her story of what happened to her afterward reveals a great deal about how the British government was actually handling this, behind the public face of complete indifference. Rosa Granville ran the Haven Ford Hotel in the village of Little Haven, just up the coast from Broadhaven. Her sighting happened on April 19, 1977, roughly 2 months after the school incident. She was woken at around 2 a.m. by a strange buzzing sound that she initially thought might be the central heating. She got up to check. What she found outside her window was an oval-shaped, brilliantly lit object that had come down into the field across from her hotel. 2 figures emerged from it. She described them as giant, long-limbed with blank faces where features should have been. She shouted at them. She said later there was light coming from it and flames of all colors. Then the creatures came out of those flames. That's what I don't understand. I shouted, "Hello. What are you doing there?" They looked faceless. I couldn't see their features. She said the heat coming off the craft, even from her window, felt like it burned her face. She woke other people up in the hotel and went to fetch them as witnesses. But by the time she got back with them, the craft and the figures were gone. The next morning, she found the grass in the field flattened and scorched, about 2 inches of burned ground in a circular pattern. Distressed and determined to be taken seriously, she wrote a letter to her Member of Parliament, Nicholas Edwards, who would later serve as the Welsh Secretary in Margaret Thatcher's cabinet. Her MP took it seriously enough to contact the Ministry of Defense directly. He wrote at the time that he was being inundated with representations about UFOs in Pembrokeshire. What happened next is where it gets interesting. The MOD's public response, the one they sent back to the MP on the record, stated that apart from Mrs. Granville's report, they had no record of unusual activity in the area. A squadron leader from RAF Brodie was dispatched to the Haven Ford Hotel to interview her. He found no physical evidence of a landing. His official report dismissed her account. He wrote with what I can only describe as a very particular kind of British military sarcasm, "Should a UFO arrive at RAF Brodie, we will charge normal landing fees and inform you immediately." One source describes the RAF officer as having told Rosa Granville to her face that her account was lies and fabrications. Now hold that publicly dismissive response in one hand, and in the other hand, hold this. On June 14, 1977, the head of S4 Air, which was the MOD branch that officially handled UFO reports, sent a letter to the Provo and Security Service, the RAF's internal police force, based at the classified facility RAF Rudler Manor in Wiltshire. The letter asked them to conduct what it specifically called a discreet inquiry into the events in Wales. Not a public inquiry, a discreet one. In that letter, the head of S4 wrote, I have not even told the minister I am consulting you. Let that land for a moment. The Ministry of Defense was running a secret investigation into the Welsh Triangle that they did not disclose to their own political oversight. They told Rosa Granville's MP there was nothing to see. They told Rosa Granville herself that she was lying. And simultaneously, behind all of that, they were quietly sending the RAF police, the same unit responsible for investigating potential Cold War security breaches, to look into what was happening on the Pembrokeshire coast. Now I want to talk about the Coombs family of Ripperston Farm, because their year in 1977 was something else entirely. Pauline Coombs was driving home alone one night along a dark Pembrokeshire County road when an orange light, roughly the size of a football, appeared behind her car. It followed her. She accelerated. It matched her speed, staying close, consistent, mile after mile along the narrow road. She pushed the car harder. The light pushed back. It followed her until the car sputtered and died on the shoulder, leaving her stranded in the dark on the side of a Welsh back road with an orange glow that then simply went away. That was one night. Over the course of that year, the Coombs family experienced things that escalated in a way that feels almost deliberate in retrospect. Their television would burn out. Car batteries would fail without explanation. Their electricity bills climbed steadily, with no cause anyone could identify. And then there were the cattle. On one occasion, Billy Coombs went to check on his herd of 158 animals. Animals that he had settled in for the night, and walked back to the farmhouse for a cup of tea. His phone rang. His neighbor was on the line asking why Billy's entire herd was in his field, a mile away, on the other side of locked gates and thick hedgerows. Billy found them exactly where the neighbor said they were. All 158 animals, moved in the time it takes to make a cup of tea. No gates had been opened. No fences had been broken. Weeks later, 16 heifers, locked in a secure pen before dawn, disappeared within minutes and were found half a mile away in another field with no explanation then and none since. The worst of it came one night in April. Pauline and Billy were watching a film when a television picture started cutting in and out. Billy got up to look at the window. Standing just outside the glass, close enough that there was almost nothing between them and it, was a figure over 7 feet tall. A one-piece silver suit, a square solid helmet, a black visor across the face, opaque and flat, like a wall in the shape of a face. A police officer who responded to the Coombs home that year said they were the most frightened family he had ever been called to see. I believe that too. So here is where it splits. And I want to be honest with you about where each explanation holds up and where it does not. The explanation that made official circles most comfortable was a man named Glyn Edwards. In 1996, nearly 20 years after the events, Edwards admitted publicly that he had walked around the Pembrokeshire countryside in a silver asbestos suit borrowed from a local oil refinery, claiming he was having a bit of fun during the media frenzy. The MOD's internal documents referenced a strong local rumor that a practical joker was responsible for some of the humanoid figure sightings, and the RAF officer who investigated noted that the description of the silver suits matched exactly the kind of protection gear used by oil refinery workers in the area. And I think this is probably true for some of what was reported. A man in a silver suit at a distance, in poor light, on a dark country road, could plausibly produce some of what people described. And I'm not dismissing that. But Glyn Edwards in a borrowed suit does not explain a 45-foot silver object hovering silently in a field, while David Davies, a self-described skeptic, watches it from 10 feet away. It does not explain 14 children drawing the same craft in separate rooms under conditions specifically designed to expose a fabrication. It does not explain Mrs. Morgan's quiet statement that she saw it too. A man in a suit cannot hover. A man in a suit cannot move 158 cattle through locked gates in under 5 minutes. The official explanation accounts for a slice of the 1977 Pembrokeshire and leaves the most important parts completely untouched. The military explanation is more substantive and deserves real consideration. Within 20 miles, 32 kilometers, of the main cluster of sightings sat several significant military installations. RAF Brodie trained fighter pilots and housed a tactical weapons unit. And then there was the U.S. Navy's underwater research station in St. Bride's Bay, which was, in reality, a submarine tracking facility that used a network of underwater microphones to monitor Soviet submarine movements in the North Atlantic. This was the height of the Cold War. Unidentified objects near classified military infrastructure were taken seriously, not because anyone thought it was extraterrestrial, but because the standing concern was Soviet reconnaissance technology. The theory is that classified aircraft, possibly experimental, possibly American, operating near sensitive military sites produced sightings that nobody could officially explain without declassifying the programs behind them. Here's where that theory runs into a wall, though. The MOD's discreet investigation, the one the head of S4 hid from his own minister, produced no final report. Whatever the RAF police found at Rudlow Manor has never been released. The author who uncovered the S4 letter wrote that he visited Broadhaven, a skeptic, and came away convinced that some of the locals knew far more about the mysterious occurrences of 1977 than they were willing to reveal. That is not the conclusion of a man who found a clean military explanation. That is the conclusion of someone who found a door that would not open. Somewhere between those two readings is where the Coombs family actually lives. Because cattle do not move through locked gates because of misidentified aircraft. Televisions do not burn out because of a man in a borrowed asbestos suit on a country road. The sustained, escalating, deeply personal nature of what happened at Ripperston Farm does not fit inside either the hoax explanation or the military one. It fits inside something else. Something that serious researchers have pointed to with increasing frequency in recent years. The possibility that whatever was operating in that part of Wales in 1977 was operating with something like intention, moving, returning, interacting, and that the proximity to classified military installations was not incidental, but it was in some sense the point. And then there is a layer underneath all of this that I cannot leave out, because it belongs to the land itself. The Mabinogion places the Welsh otherworld directly in Duvid. The Tylwyth Teg, the Welsh fairy folk, were described for centuries in this part of the world as luminous humanoid figures, sometimes appearing at farmhouse windows, sometimes associated with disruptions to livestock, sometimes interacting with people in ways that left the person fundamentally altered. The Welsh-American consul Wirt Sykes, writing in the 1880s, described Pembrokeshire as that isolated cape looked upon as a land of mystery by the rest of Wales, where out of its misty darkness came fables of wondrous sort and accounts of miracles marvelous beyond belief. He wrote that in 1880, about the same piece of coastline, nearly 100 years before the children stood at the fence. The language changes across the centuries. Fairy becomes alien. Otherworld becomes outer space. The silver figure with the wrong face has been appearing in this corner of Wales for a very long time, and the people who encounter it have always struggled to explain it, and the authorities have always found a reason to dismiss them. That pattern, I think, is worth more attention than it usually gets. 14 children. A cold February afternoon. A wet field in Wales. David Davies is now in his late 50s. He was the skeptic, remember? The one who went back after school to disprove it. He has had 5 decades to find a more comfortable version of the story, and he's not found one. Because he's not looking for one. He saw what he saw. He drew what he drew. And a drawing looks like the other 13 drawings, because that is what was in the field. Michael Webb watched it for between 3 to 5 minutes in broad daylight. He was 10 years old, and I'm sure it was a spaceship is exactly as certain as anything Michael Webb has said about it since. Philip Rees was frightened. Jeremy Passmore was scared he was going to be disintegrated. Paul Williams saw something come out of it with a helmet. And their teacher, Mrs. Morgan, said quietly, as if it needed saying, "I saw it too, you know." You know, I believe them. All of them. I believe them because of what Ralph Llewellyn did and what it produced. Because you did not design a test to catch children in a lie and then walk away from 14 matching drawings without something shifting in you. Something shifted in Llewellyn. He went quiet. And quiet in this case is its own kind of testimony. I'm grateful that this case exists. I'm grateful that David Davies is still out there telling his story, still saying the same thing he said when he was halfway over the schoolyard fence in 1977. Because cases like this one, with real names and real drawings and a real headmaster who tried to debunk it and could not, are the reason this show exists. They are the reason I started doing this at all. Which brings me to something I want to say. This is episode 20, the end of season 1, and I'm genuinely, deeply grateful. Not in a polished, scripted way, but rather in a way where I'm not entirely sure I have the right words for it, which is a strange position for a podcaster to be in. You know, when I started Still Unexplained, I did not know if anyone would want to sit inside these stories the way I do. You know, without a neat resolution, without someone telling you what to think. Just a curious person, a good case, and the willingness to stay in the uncomfortable space between what we know and what we do not. And you showed up for that. And you kept showing up. You sent messages and left reviews and shared episodes with people you thought might need them. And every single one of those things meant something real to me. There's no break between the seasons. Episode 21 is out next week, and season 2 is going to take this show to places it has not yet been. I've been sitting on some of these cases for months, and I'm genuinely excited to get them out in front of you. Thank you. For real. Thank you. Still Unexplained is created and hosted by me, Mark Evanoff. If this episode stayed with you, you can find more at www.stillunexplained.com, including a 30-second preview with images from the Broadhaven incident, the children's drawings, and documents from this case. Please follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating or review, and share it with someone who still looks up and wonders. I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.